Hello and welcome to Change Your Story, Change Your Life. I am Mitch Austin, your host today, and I'm your guest. And I hope everyone is enjoying a wonderful 2024. I know I have a hard time remembering to put that on paperwork. Am I alone? Anybody else have that issue? So today is actually our last live show. I know, boo. It's been a real journey, a lot of fun coming on, sharing stories of my guests, some of my own personal stories, and helping us get beyond the mask, beyond the public persona, to open up and to talk about the journey of our life, the unfolding of our life, those defining moments where things changed, where life shifted, where we either had to make a choice or move through our story differently, and how that's created a new path. You know, we can look at the sliding doors of our life and ask ourselves, what if? What if? What if maybe you're dating someone right now? What if you had met 10 years earlier? I was just having this conversation with my girlfriend, Karen, and I said, what if we met in our 30s? Would we have had kids? You know, we had this really great discussion about how we would have probably flamed out like comets and not even been together. And now the version of ourselves that we are now are in a different story. We're in a different version of who we are on this path, and in a better place to actually journey together. And so it's kind of fun, I think, to look back. But the reason I love stories so much is we live in stories, we move in stories, we think in stories. And the stories that we tell ourselves, that we tell each other, give us a sense of anchoring what's going on in our lives. We are hardwired to make sense of things. And the easiest way for us to make sense of things is, well, to tell a story. You know, there's even been some good science behind this about how our mind tends to make things up. I was listening to a podcast about a scientific experiment where it was some social scientists and some college students, and they went to the mall. And the college students, some of them had hot coffee and some of them had cold coffee. And they would walk up to random people and ask them to hold their coffee while they tied their shoelace and then took the coffee back. That same person later would be intercepted, unbeknownst to them, by someone handing out $20 bills for people to read a paragraph and then answer some questions about the main character. And when they did this, the questions were, how did you feel about the main character? Were they mean or were they nice? And of course, ironically enough, the people holding the warm or hot coffees thought the main character was engaging and warm and kind. And the people that held the cold coffees thought the main character was aloof and distant and not nice, right? And I think it's funny because I'm sure these people didn't know that their bodily sensations were shaping the story, the interpretation of the story, and then the story they made up about the main character. And so I think it's important for us to look at the stories we're telling ourselves and to see which stories are empowering, which ones we were just handed off by sometimes our upbringing, our culture, our community, our parents. You know, I grew up in a family that, well, loved to have a good time. And unfortunately, with a lot of alcohol. So we were just a partying family. I didn't know what another kind of family looked like. And that was a story I stepped into in particularly my younger years. And I always say when I get to heaven, I can't tell God I didn't have a good time. But at the same time, there were other options. And I've definitely rewritten my story many times. And we have the power to do that. We have the power to say, I like this part of my story. I don't like this part of my story. And there's many people who, when they do that, have been able to make really big leaps in their experience. Some people are Byron Katie fans, and if you know anything about her story, she suffered from extreme depression. She would lay in the room in the dark on the floor because she didn't feel she deserved to lay in the bed with these really dark thoughts and stories she was telling herself about herself. And this went on for months and months and months until one day she had a thought. And the thought was, what if what I'm telling myself, right? What if the story I'm telling myself isn't true? And that one little question opened up her mind and her consciousness in a new way, where she continued that thread of challenging her thoughts, challenging the dark stories, the limiting mindset she was telling herself about herself. And from this one shift, from this one inquiry, grew her work in the world called The Work, where you ask yourself 4 questions. Is it true? Is it really true? And who would you be if this wasn't true? And then there's one more, I don't remember what it is, but you can look it up. It's really powerful work, because if we challenge some of these stories and assumptions we've made about ourselves or even about each other, we can have a new experience, even if nothing changes, just by telling a new story. One of my favorite people in the world, or used to be in the world, Buckminster Fuller, really incredible man. And he didn't have such a good start to his story. He was married, he had children, he was probably a functional alcoholic. He drank quite a bit. And when he lost his youngest daughter, it put him over the edge to, end his story, jump in the river, take his own life. He felt like he had nothing to live for. And before he jumped in that river, he had a thought, an insight, a different line or verse in his own story. And this is what it was. If I'm going to throw away my life anyhow, why don't I do an experiment and see how one person's life could change the world? That was his experiment. How could one life be so impactful to the world? And that took him down a whole different journey. He became an architect. He studied all different kinds of disciplines. I think he designed the first roundhouse. He discovered ways to have the whole planet thrive, that we didn't need to reduce our population. We needed to use our resources differently. Really an amazing person who took this life he was going to throw away in that one version of his story and then rewrote it into another and very impactful one. And we all have this power to rethink the roles, the labels, and the narrative, right? Because we're all born into a story, right? We all had some form of caretakers, and an environment, a body we came into, an identity we were given, a name. And then the people around us started to reflect what they thought were our strengths or our deficits. And up until pretty much the age of 7, everything that comes into us, everything we're told just goes right into our programming, right into our subconscious mind. And if those things were that you're pretty and you're talented, you thought to yourself, I'm pretty and I'm talented, or I'm handsome and I'm smart, or whatever combination it was for you. But unfortunately, the opposite is true. If you were told you're always screwing things up, you're a burden, why can't you be quiet? All of these things, that gets in there too. But the good news is that when we come across these limiting beliefs or ideas or memes about ourselves, we can change it. And a great way to change it is to change our story. And in order for us to change our story, we have to change our identity in it. You know, when I started this show, I had never done a show before. It's like, well, what am I going to do? I guess now I have to be a show host. I have to step into the identity of someone who hosts a show. And now that I'm playing show host, what does that look like? What would a show host do? Who could I model? Who could I emulate? And then when the show time starts, that's who I am. I'm Reverend Mitch Austin, your show host for Change Your Story, Change Your Life. And I get to step into that role because every story has a theme, it has a role, and you in it assume an identity. And as we assume that identity, we grow into it. I'll be honest, my first few shows were a little like rickety, right? I had these interesting little like bloopers and tics and nervousness and all of these things that I did, that as I kept assuming the new identity of the new story I had told myself, I started to grow into it. I started to feel more and more like that. The same is true for my speaking career. I had always known I was a speaker on the inside, but I wasn't really doing it much in the world. And once I started to assume that identity, once I started to get opportunities to speak, even though my heart's flying out of my chest and I'm shaky and I'm nervous and I can barely breathe and my mouth is dry, I go up on the stage, I'm the speaker. As soon as I get in front of the mic, that's the identity, that's the role, that's the story that I'm stepping into. Now, fortunately, I speak at spiritual centers all over, and it's been amazing and an incredible ride. And I don't get near the nerves that I used to because I've grown into it. I've expanded into that new story, that new identity. And I continue to marinate and grow even deeper into this way of being. And we know, metaphysically speaking, and if you study any Neville Goddard, and if you haven't heard of him, please Google him. Wonderful metaphysician, incredibly powerful, lots of YouTube videos. But his main thing about utilizing our mind and the law of attraction is to assume the new identity, to step into that new role, and to walk around in that story. You know, what we tell ourselves about ourselves really does impact our behavior. I remember a couple of years ago, I went to a Halloween party, and it was a very well-stocked bar at the Halloween party. And people were getting their drinks, and people were asking me if I wanted a drink. And I just blurted out, I said, well, I really don't drink. I'm not much of a drinker. That was my new identity. Not because I couldn't or I just didn't want to. Like there was a new skin I had put on and a new story I was telling myself, and I genuinely didn't want any alcohol. You know, the person that came from the partying family, right? A whole new way of moving through the world, and the identity, that the I am statement. I'm just not a drinker. I'm just not a partier. And these little memes, these little snippets of the role and the story with which we move around in have a profound impact on which doors open and which doors close, on what shows up, on the choices we make, and how we move through the world. And even what we tell people about ourselves. All life-changing. So today, you're going to get a whole earful of me and talking about changing our story and changing our lives. And I actually wanted to get into more of the nuts and bolts. Like, how do we change our stories? What are some thoughts about changing our stories? And how do we actually do that? So we're going to go to commercial break here shortly, but come back. We're going to get some ideas about how to change your story in the new year. So see you real soon. Welcome back. Rev Mitch here to change your story, change your life. And today you're getting me in the new year in our final show. I know, boo, yay. It's funny. It was a hard decision to try and think about whether I was going to be continuing with the show or not. And I noticed that in my end of year review and some of the vision I had moving forward, that I had a lot of passion projects, a lot of things I want to get to this year, and I had to prioritize. And unfortunately, the show, I needed to reclaim that time for some major projects I have coming up this year. One of which is I'm doing a really cool workshop called Goal Mapping, where I bring together the best of metaphysics and science to help people put together their goals and their actual plan to execute those goals, along with identifying their saboteurs, their strengths, resources, accountability, habit formation, whole thing. I'm going to do this in January live in person at the Amani Center, and we still have some spots available. It's actually very popular. We're having a lot of people sign up, which I'm excited. It's going to be a great day. It's a full 5-hour process that we're going to go through. And if you're interested in that, you can email me and I'm happy to get you more information. Unfortunately, I'm not doing that one online, but I am looking at offering an online version. So if that speaks to you and you want to step into this year in a different way, because if you want a different result, right, we got to do something different. And if you want to, and part of that process of the goal mapping is to assume the new identity of the person who's reached those goals. So when we walk around in that skin, we make decisions in alignment with somebody who actually attracts those things and does those things. So it's going to be really exciting. So if you're interested in that workshop, I'm going to do an online version. I haven't scheduled it yet. Just reach out to Mitch at speakteachinspire.com, and I'd love to continue the conversation with you. The other passion project I have is I'm putting together a one-man play, but I'm actually calling it a one-whoa-man play, telling my story of transition from my life as Michelle, as female, as to my life now as Mitch, showing male identity and what that journey looked like, the highs, the lows, the good, the bad, and the fantastic. I don't know. I've come up with all kinds of taglines. Big part of the reason I want to share this story, and a big part of the reason I encourage people to share their stories, is it makes us feel more connected. Stories give us back our sense of connection and humanity. They also have the ability to educate, and that's really one of the biggest reasons I want to do the show. There's a lot of people struggling out there with people who are changing their identities, or more accurately, aligning or showing their internal self more accurately now with their change in name, look, pronouns. We're all seeing each other much more clearly than perhaps we used to. And so that's part of my goal this year too. So big goals, and I'm excited. So definitely, if you want to stay in touch with me, get on my mailing list so you can hear more about that. Would love to share that with you. Stories also have a way of making us immortal and making our loved ones immortal. And by telling their stories, it's like we can keep a piece of them alive with us. I came across this wonderful little blurb from a blog called Love Notes Digest Daily. So I encourage you to check it out. But here's what it says, and I posted this on my Facebook and I got a lot of really good reaction from it. It says, each of us at some point will face the heart-wrenching pain of losing someone dear. It's a universal truth that binds us in our shared humanity. But within this deep sorrow lies an incredible strength, the ability to keep the spirit of our loved ones alive through memories. Remember, it's not just the grand life-altering moments that count. It's the small, everyday interactions, the quiet laughs, the shared glances, the comfort you felt in their presence. These memories are a testament to the love that once was and still is a vital part of who we are. They serve as the bridge connecting us to those we've lost, ensuring that their essence remains a guiding light in our lives. Isn't that beautiful? Telling the stories helps make sure that their essence remains a guiding light in our lives. And anyone who knows me knows that I tell a lot of mom stories, who's no longer on the planet with me in physical form, but definitely in spirit. And we were very, very close. And in fact, she was my first metaphysical teacher. And a big part of the reason I'm still in this teaching, and probably why I considered getting my ministerial license as well. And just by telling her stories, I feel like a little piece of her spirit is still alive. In fact, I met my girlfriend's parents over the holidays, and somehow a mom story slipped out. And I told the story of when I brought her back to Europe. She hadn't been back in 40 years, which was where she was raised and born. And she was quite a character, and she played a little joke on me. When I first came to Paris, I'd always wanted with her to eat at a restaurant and have a filet mignon because I had grown up with that kind of fare, a lot of French food. And we got there and she ordered for me in French. And at the end of the trip, she says, well, I have something to tell you, but you're going to be upset at me. And I said, okay, well, what is it? And then she's like, are you going to be upset at me? Because, she wanted to prolong the suspense. And I said, Mom, what is it? And she goes, well, the first night we got here, they were out of beef. I ordered cheval. You ate horse. She fed me horse. I know, it was terrible, terrible. I'm like, Mom, a horse, it's a beautiful animal. I don't want to eat horses. She said, well, you said you liked it. I said, they're not for eat. I don't want to eat horse. She goes, I said, we shouldn't be eating horses. She goes, well, I'm sure it was an old horse that had a good life. And she's smoking on her cigarette, laughing away. Yeah, I told that story. They're not vegetarian, so that's okay. And so in that moment, I felt her essence. I felt her energy. So I encourage us, tell the stories of our loved ones. And as we move forward through the year, not just the big life-altering stories, but the little sweet moments, the preferred foods you ate with your loved ones, the little inside jokes that you had, all of it stirs our soul. And it provides inspiration, not just for you, but for those around you as well. So story. How do we change our story? You might be asking. Well, I came across a really cool article. It's online. You can grab this. It's called Change Your Story, Change Your Life by Dawn Romero. And it's about 4, 5, 6 pages. And in here, Dawn has 7 steps for us to look at changing our story. And I wanted to review some of those steps with you and discuss how we might apply some of these moving forward. So the first step, Dawn says, is a way to change your story is to determine what you want your story to be. This is a great time of year to do that. What do I want my story to be in 2024? In fact, you could even play a little game with yourself and say, if this year was a chapter in the book of my own life, what would I want this chapter title to be? And I think for me, I think I want this chapter title to be The Next Level of Mitch. Mitch 3.0 in full bloom. Mitch 3.0 in full bloom. So what does that look like? I'm doing the one-man show. I'm writing a book. I'm doing my keynote. I want to get out in the world and do some keynote speaking. I'm going to be applying for a TED Talk. Yay, a TED Talk. Right? All these scenes in this chapter, in this story of 2024. What does that look like? So you could play a little game with yourself and say, well, what's the name of this year's chapter in my book? and have that kind of bigger vision and feeling tones as you begin to write your story. Be the writer now versus reacting to conditions, events, pressures, expectations. Just right now. You can pick any title you want, any story you want. Maybe it's a story of overcoming. Maybe you're going to actually overcome your money stuff and get that organized and cleaned up and get to another level with your money life. Or maybe it's your love life. This is the year to find a partner, to step in to the person who is in love with somebody. You know, I've often heard stories of people setting tables and setting tables of their beloved and being able to step into that as if they have one, right? And then manifesting one, manifesting someone to sit on the other side and eat the food. Or maybe this is the year you up-level your health. Let's be honest, we all know how to be healthier. It's just a matter of making that a priority and a choice every day. And I run a little program called Eat, Pray, Live, where I help people do that in mind, body, and spirit to up-level their well-being. And I take them through a little easy program to begin to make small shifts that have a big impact. Some of my clients have lost 15, 20 pounds. One client is sleeping 50% more than she used to. Someone else was on 60 units of insulin, is now down to 10 a day. Someone else grew their hair got thicker. Someone else, their mind got a lot sharper. So it's really a fun program. And if you're interested in that, I'm happy to support you. But what is it going to be for you? Right? What area of your life, or maybe it's vocation. Maybe you know it's time to move into another contribution that you're making into the world, whether it's on a volunteer basis or paid or your own business. That call that keeps coming back, that's your soul pulling you to tell a new story. So think about what it is for you. And then when you do get some clarity around this, and I invite you to write it down so that you are clear and you don't forget, because you ever clear about something and then later you forget? Oh, that totally happens. So if you write it down, you can remember the clarity that you had, and then you can continue to step into those feeling tones so that you can start to manifest it. So now we're going to talk about steps 2, 3, and 4 next. But before we do, we're going to pop into one more quick commercial, and then we're going to discuss the next steps, what to do after you've gotten this clarity on what you want your story to be in the upcoming year. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
New Thought Radio, music from all your favorite New Thought artists. From Jamie Lula, Karen Drucker, Gary Lynn Floyd, Ricky Byers, Daniel Nahmod, Eddie Watkins Jr., and many, many more. 24/7 New Thought Radio. Positively inspiring.
Hello, Mitch Austin here. Change your story, change your life. New Thought Radio. Very cool. I hope we all check it out. I can't wait to see it and check it out. I love how New Thought Media is just expanding and expanding and expanding. Truly a light in the world. And I do invite people, let's support this movement, you know, and see if we can start to get some more resources, some more show hosts, some more people who are producing shows, like my producer, Zoe DeMuro. Thank you so much, Zoe. So appreciate. There's actually somebody who does all these. I don't do them. We need people behind the scenes. We need people in front of the camera. And we also need your treasure. We need a little bit of your coin, a little bit of anything you can give. Even if you can give a Starbucks coffee worth of a donation during today's show would be absolutely wonderful. I think Zoe will drop a link here during the show that you can just click on and make your little 5, 10, 20, 1,000, whatever you feel called to do for this work in the world. So let's get back to how to change your story so you can change your life. We just talked about determine what you want it to be. And then be mindful. Step number 2, be mindful of how you speak to yourself, right? Because if you are now the person who's debt-free, but you speak to yourself like someone who isn't good with money, right? Oh, I'm just not good with money. You tell friends, right? Then you are assuming an identity that isn't in alignment with your new story. So we got to monitor that language. And if you start what I call shoulding on yourself, like I should do this, I should do that, I'm going to invite you to switch out that word for could. It's much more empowering, and it's going to help keep you in a higher vibration, in greater alignment with this new story that you're stepping into in 2024. The third step is to become grateful for the people and experiences and things you already have. And, many times on the show I have said, and I invite you to adopt this if it feels true for you, for me, everything in my life is either a lesson or a blessing. And really, lessons are blessings in disguise. They're usually the rougher blessings. They're the ones, the tough love, the examples of how I don't want to be in the world, or what needs to be healed that I experienced. And when I put on that lens, when I frame every experience in my story, past and present, through a lesson or blessing, it changes how I feel about it. It changes what I look for in the event that has happened in the past or in the present, so that I can take something of value and bring it forward in my experience. I remember I wrote a poem in middle school, and it goes like this. As I reminisce with myself, I see I've put much of me on a shelf. To think what could have been can only break my heart. So I restart the never-ending part. See, we can begin again. We can tell ourselves a better and more empowering story. Things don't have to be hard. What if it's easy? To be more healthy, to change vocations, to clean up my money life. What if it's easy? Maybe it can be easy. And when we put that in our story, we're going to see more easy show up in our experience. But everything, the people, the experiences, and the things that have happened in your life have brought you to this moment. And this moment is where you're casting your vision and your new story from. And without those people, without those experiences, without those things, you wouldn't be casting this story. It gives us a new growing edge of our life to step into. And here's what I know about growing edges in our existence. If we're not growing, if something isn't growing on some level, it's dying. And that could be a spiritual death, emotional, physical, right? So the more we stay on our growing edge, the more vibrancy life has. Science has even studied this idea of goal setting, which requires us to grow, actually makes us happier. Just having a goal, right? And maybe your goal is this new story for 2024. Just having it will make you happier. It will give you a sense of meaning and purpose and something to pour your attention into that brings that vibrancy of life and excitement alive. Step 4, limit your exposure to people who are critical, negative, self-sabotaging, and draining. I remember when I decided to take a conscious look at my friend circle many, many years ago. And people who I had given title friends to didn't always fit my definition of a friend. Some people I really associated with me as I'm the dumping ground for their problems. And it wasn't balanced. There wasn't a balance of support and care and interest. And I started to work on my definition of friendship, because my new story was I had a lot of really great and beautiful, supportive, connecting friends. That was my new story, but that wasn't the reality I was in. And when I became more clear about that, more discerning, and that was my new story, my new goal, I began to make my decisions of where I placed my time and whose company differently. So you might want to ask yourself, that person that invites you to lunch every month, is that really a friend? Or are they just showing up because you're a polite listener? You might want to relook at that relationship. Is it filling you, or are you being filled with their energy and they're feeling better and you're not, right? A lot of that, we call it energy vampire, I think is the term for that. So we want to limit our time. We can love them from a distance, but it doesn't mean we have to be in their presence as much. And I would invite you to get in alignment, and that's actually number 6, with people who do share your vision, your values, who see the potential in you, who support who you are, who you're becoming. You know, science has said, if you're going to tell your dreams or your goals to someone, to tell them to somebody who's going to support you, who's going to say yes, who's going to go on the journey with you and celebrate and be a cheerleader. When you do that, it's actually very powerful. But if you share your dreams, your new identity, your new story with people who only want to keep you in your old story, that can be very damaging and defeating. And I do believe together we're better, but we need to pick the right togethers. That's in alignment with where we're going and who we're stepping into in this next version of our story. Then number 5 is to keep what you are trying to accomplish with you, literally and figuratively. And this comes down to writing things down again. They did a study, I think, on writing goals down, that if you wrote a goal down, you were like 75% more likely to accomplish the goal. If you just wrote it down, just writing it down. And part of what I like about taking time and attention to write a goal down is it forces you to get specific, clear, and I think it deepens the intentionality. And when you can keep the new story chapter in front of you, the action steps you're going to take, or the goals, or what you've decided to do in front of you, either visually or maybe in an affirmation, in the languaging you use, the more you stay awake to this new story. Because it's easy to get pulled back into the old narrative, right? It's easy to get pulled back into the familiar. And that's our comfort zone. It's actually what I call one of the 4 horsemen that keeps you from your whole self, because we tend to live divided lives. We feel we've got to hide part of ourselves here, maybe in relationship or work or community, and then keep that other part hidden. And so we start dividing who we are, depending on which role or space we're in. It's what Parker Palmer calls the divided life. And one of the horsemen to that, one of the reasons we do, is we get comfortable. And I think our comfort zone is our biggest challenge to getting to that next story chapter or that new version or making those changes. It requires effort. It requires willing to be uncomfortable, and that there's a gap. There's a gap between who you are and your next story. That gap, the bardo, that space that you step into where you're no longer the old and you're no longer the new, is the biggest challenge we have in becoming these new stories that we're writing for ourselves. And so I encourage you, if you step into that space, or maybe you're in it now, get support. Remind yourself why you're there, where you're going, and how this is going to pay off for your life. And again, aligning yourself with people maybe who are going through similar situations, so you can have that collective support, and reminder. So someone can remind you when you forgot. I think that's why it's so powerful to get with a coach or a best friend or a mastermind group. They help keep fresh before us our resolve, our decision, our goals, our hopes, our dreams, our new story. And then number 6 is to, well, don't give up. Don't give up. You know, they've done some studies on goal setting in terms of trajectory, and that people often over assume or over believe, or whatever you want to call it. They think they can accomplish a lot more in 1 year than they actually can, right? We tend to overestimate how much we can accomplish in 1 year. But here's the interesting fact. We underestimate how much we can accomplish in 3 years. So maybe it isn't that we've set unrealistic goals. We may have set unrealistic timelines. But we won't know this if we give up. Anyone can quit. Anyone can quit. And I know when we quit, when we don't keep our word for something that really matters to us, we just don't trust ourselves as much. We tend to not believe in ourselves as much. It tends to eat away at our self-determinism and our own inner power. So I invite you to not give up. You know, this story about the guy who was digging for gold and digging, and he dug for years and years and years and years, and finally he just gave up. And then a friend of his had heard about the mine he was digging and went in, and he dug 3 feet and he hit gold. So maybe you're just 3 feet from gold. And what if you put that in your own story? I'm just 3 feet from gold. I'm going to keep going. That shift, that change, that new story, that up level, that next version of your experience of life might just be 3 feet away. And the truth is, we only do things in small increments. You know, I love Mary Morrissey talks about getting from San Francisco to LA. You can't just get there. You get on the road and you drive, you know, mile by mile by mile by mile by mile. And we all accept that that's the way we get from San Francisco to LA. We all accept it's going to take the mile after mile after mile. But sometimes I think we're too quick to not travel the mile after mile that's involved in our news story, and then to go back to what is familiar that we think is safe. But I guess we all have to make a decision about what kind of journey, what kind of story we're living. And there's really no judgment about that. The only judge you need to worry about is the one in here. What's really true for you? What makes a life worth living for you? And what kind of story goes along with that version of your life? So we're going to dive into just a little more of how to change your story, change your life in just a minute. We're going to go to one more commercial break. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Let's do something fun. Let's go on vacation. Let's take some time off just to do something fun with none of the usual to-do list that we have to deal with from day to day. And let's do it right now. And it'll only take a few seconds. Take a deep breath. Let it out. Take a break. Give yourself the gift of a moment. Allow yourself to stop doing and simply be. Because you are a bright light of love, and for you, being is more than enough.
Hey, Mitch Austin here, Reverend Mitch Austin, back with the final episode, Change Your Story, Change Your Life. I want to thank everybody who's been supporting the show and coming on, and all my guests. Oh my gosh, so many amazing guests, so many brilliant, bright lights, people willing to go deep, share their truth, share their story. Because, you know, the story sometimes has some unelegant parts. It really does. And when we are willing to be vulnerable and share some of those unelegant parts, it makes people feel like, oh, it's not just me. It's not just me that struggles with this. It's not just me who fell down. It's not just me who made a poor decision. And it helps us feel like we're not so flawed. We're not so weird. And we're not so different. And we really aren't. We're all cells in a body we can call humanity, feeding off each other, supporting each other, nourishing each other, and working hopefully in tandem. And I think that's a big part of what spiritual community special centers for spiritual living and many of the other metaphysical communities are trying to do, is row together in this body of humanity in such a way that is more loving, healing, connected. In whatever way you define higher power. It's more about not what to think, but consideration for how to live, and some ideas about spirit, higher power, spiritual laws, how the universe works. And I love some of the questions that unfold. And questions are a great way to shift your story. There are what if questions. What if I tried to do a show on New Thought Media Network? Maybe some of you are asking yourself that very thing. And what would that story look like? And we start to script it in our heads. And that's the birthplace, that scripting in our heads, that workshop of the imagination is the birthplace of that new story. Or maybe you are looking to write a book and tell a story in writing. That first draft starts in here and in here. So asking yourself, what if? What if? What if I tried this? And then give yourself permission to do it unelegantly. If anybody's ever read Anne Lamont's Bird by Bird, she does many drafts of a book that we finally see as a final copy. But in order for her to get to that final draft, she has to give herself permission to do her first, well, we'll keep it clean, crappy draft. She uses a different word. So that she can get to the next and the next and the next. So I invite you, as you start to rewrite your story in whatever way you like, give yourself permission to be a beginner, to be unelegant, to learn through experience. Because there's only some things we can read about, we can ask about, we can watch videos on YouTube. But until we do it, until we get in the pool and swim in that experience, we're not going to learn all that we need to know to get to the next mile of your story, the next unfolding, the next verse or scene that's involved in the becoming. And sometimes that can be difficult. Sometimes that can be humbling, but it's always adventurous. It's always, I've been in the ring of life doing something, something outside my comfort zone. And you never know who you might inspire along the way when you do that. You know, one of my favorite programs that I teach, and I'm going to be rolling out this year in some centers, is the Rise and Speak program, where I help people do a look back on their life, find that lesson or blessing, take a defining moment, and then craft a little short spoken message, a little TED Talk type message, and then perform it live in front of a very loving and supportive crowd. And in doing this work for 5 years now, I've put nearly 100 people through the program. Over 90% of the people that participate actually finish and do the talk, which is optional. It's always optional, but people feel a sense to do it. But in sharing our stories, our life stories, and willing to be seen in a safe and loving, affirming space, I have just witnessed weights fall off of people, telling secrets they've never told anyone, having revelations about what unfolded, being able to do the look back from this version of yourself into a past event and seeing something you never saw before. I remember my mother had this experience once. Every holiday, she would tell me about her mother, and her mother made them live on a concentration camp. Her mother was married to a German who was part of the resistance against Hitler. And because she was married, they all had to live on the camp. And the SS officers would tell her mother, look, if you just divorce your husband, we'll let you go. But she wouldn't do it. My mom was so bitter about that. And one day I said to my mom, did you ever consider that your mom said no because where she was at, she knew how to get food and resources and things for her children and herself? Where was she going to go in war-torn Europe with no husband, no home, and no resources? She looked at me and she stared almost through me like she just saw something she'd never seen before. And then she looked at me in my eyes and she said, you might be right about that. See, the power of looking back can help us heal things in ways we can't even imagine. And so I invite you in rewriting your story to also look back and see where you might want to edit some of the chapters, where you might see something new, where you might see a lesson or blessing. Because this has the power to change everything. I think this is why many Native American cultures say that when you heal 7 generations back and 7 generations forward. That we're each, our story is a ripple in a pond full of stories. And we all impact one another with how we're telling them, how we're living in them, and how we're embodying them. So I invite you in this year, this brand new baby year, to tell a new, brave, bold, inspiring, healing, kind, loving story. The one that you are divinely equipped to tell. All that only you can live and be. And if there's any way I can support you in this journey, please feel free to reach out to me. It's my greatest joy and hope that you take this opportunity, this day, this week, this month, this year, to glow, to heal, to radiate the beautiful divine being you came here to be. And so this is the last show. Thank you so much for supporting the show. I want to give some shout outs. I want to thank New Thought Media Network for hosting this show for the past 5 months and all the love and support and guidance I received in this. I want to thank 18 Source Productions in Sacramento. They do amazing sound productions, video productions. They even help narrate books. They do all kinds of amazing, wonderful work. 18 Source Productions. Please check them out if you have any need of audio visual, whether it's music, poetry, meditation, whatever you need, they'll help you out. And of course, I want to thank my producer, Zoe Demura, today, and for the many shows that he's helped produce and keep me in track. And so until we meet again, keep telling your stories, keep shining your light. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for watching.